Niagara Falls is without a doubt one of the most spectacular sights in the natural world. It's a sobering reminder of just how powerful Mother Nature is and how small we as humans are. But what if the 6 million cubic feet of water barreling over the edge per minute just stopped? Well, that's exactly what happened when engineers briefly had the Niagara Falls drained in 1969. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Niagara Falls is a group of 3 stunning waterfalls, American Falls, Bridal Veil Falls, and Horseshoe Falls, between Canada and the United States. It's not hard to see why it draws in millions of visitors every year. In fact, even the greats were left awestruck. Charles Dickens wrote in 1842, "When I felt how near to my Creator I was standing, the first effect, and the enduring one instant lasting of the tremendous spectacle was peace." Niagara Falls was formed about 10,000 years ago during the last ice age when ice sheets tore through the landscape to form a path through the Niagara Escarpment en route to the Atlantic Ocean. Niagara Falls is best known, of course, for its beauty, but it's also known for being a valuable source of hydroelectric power, for better or for worse. Although Native Americans had surely been aware of the existence of Niagara Falls for ages, surprisingly it wasn't written about by European settlers until 1678 when Father Louis Hennepin traveled to what was deemed New France. 5 years later, Hennepin published a new discovery that detailed the wonders of the falls, and from then on, more and more people flocked there to visit. As more and more people began to take notice of Niagara Falls, industrialists also recognized its potential for powering factories and mills, and thus the first hydroelectric generating station of its kind was opened in 1895. Thanks to an invention by Nikola Tesla, even today the plants are able to produce 2.4 million kilowatts of power that gets carried all over the world. Niagara Falls is actually much more man-made than most realize, so much so that historian Daniel McFarlane even called it a completely man-made and artificial cataract. This is because without human intervention, Niagara Falls would erode much more quickly than it already has. In fact, scientific intervention has helped reduce the erosion by more than 85%. So the next time you want to plan a trip out to Niagara Falls, thank the engineers who have saved it from its natural fate. Conservation efforts at Niagara Falls weren't new by the 1960s by any means. In fact, by the early 1900s, such a large percentage of water was being diverted to businesses that conversations around how to best preserve the fall's natural beauty became commonplace. Even by the 1800s, these efforts had been underway for some time due to early industrialization. A treaty from 1950 allows some of Niagara Falls water to be diverted into power plants, meaning that at certain times the water flow will inevitably decrease. But thankfully, engineers have figured out a way to do this only at night, as to not take too much away from the spectacular view that visitors go there to see during the day. Water still gets diverted to this day, just as it has in the past, but in fact, visitors only see a fraction of the amount of water that's supposed to go over the falls. The rest is used for industrial purposes. Can you even imagine what it would be like if 100% of the water was actually used for the falls themselves? As you can see, Niagara Falls has been important to humanity in a multitude of ways, from generating power to serving as a majestic bucket list destination for so many of us. So what happens when the water flow needs to be halted for a brief amount of time? It's a strange thought, but in 1969, that exact scenario became a reality. In 1965, the people of Niagara Falls, New York, were growing concerned that American Falls was losing its charm because of a buildup of talus, rock that was accumulating at the base of the waterfall, that was preventing the water from going over in a straight drop. In other words, American Falls wasn't quite as aesthetically pleasing as it used to be. Around the same time, a local journalist published an article about the potential for erosion to deteriorate American Falls over time, and thus a campaign was created to try to save the landmark. Accordingly, engineers decided to conduct a geological survey of the rock face that had become destabilized due to the aforementioned erosion. They got to work, but no one realized how much work it would really be. A plan was drafted up in 1966 that set out to reduce the water flow from 60,000 gallons per second to just 15,000 gallons in order for the engineers to look more closely at the riverbed as well as haul away any debris. But officials soon realized that a more drastic plan was needed to complete the job. American Falls would need to be completely drained in order to solve the erosion issue. In June of 1969, the Army Corps of Engineers built a 600-foot dam across the Niagara in order to divert 60,000 gallons per second of water from American Falls into Horseshoe Falls. Luckily, American Falls only received 10% of the water flow of all of the dams, so Horseshoe Falls was easily able to absorb the extra flow of water. For the first time in history, American Falls now stood completely dry, and scientists went to work artificially reinforcing any faults they found in the riverbed. Although it was an incredibly daunting task, it was a necessary one to slow the erosion that will one day lead to the demise of the falls. How surreal would it feel to be standing in the dry riverbed of an ancient geological work of art? Interestingly, in the end, the engineers decided against removing the talus that had been piling up over the years and instead focused on reinforcing any faults in the riverbed. They wrote about their decision to forego removing the boulders in their final report. Recent emphasis on environmental values has raised questions about changing natural conditions even for demonstrated natural and measurable social benefits. City officials were rightfully concerned that halting the water flow would decrease the number of visitors and thus hurt the local economy. Although 100,000 people did end up showing up the first weekend after the draining, unfortunately tourism did dwindle for the remainder of the year. Nevertheless, the people who did show up were treated to a once-in-a-lifetime sight. Some even walked right out onto the dry riverbed. During this time, workers installed a walkway that allowed the curious visitors to get more of an up-close and personal view of the dry falls. The walkway was just 20 feet from the edge of the falls, so observers got a look at things from a spot that would otherwise be entirely inaccessible and dangerous for anyone. But unfortunately, observers also spotted something horrible. But despite Niagara's beauty and ability to leave absolutely anyone in its presence awestruck, the falls have a much more sinister side to them. Approximately 5,000 bodies have been found between 1,850 and 2,011, majority having been ruled suicides. This means that on average 20–30 people take their own lives by jumping over the falls every year. Unfortunately, observers in 1,969 had to witness the remains of this firsthand. Sometime during all of the excitement, visitors spotted the remains of a man in the riverbed who had met the same terrible fate. His death was officially determined to be a suicide, and he had reportedly jumped over the falls the day before the water was drained. Observers initially assumed the young man was part of the group of workers surveying the land, but realized something was terribly wrong when he jumped into the water. Tragically, observers also discovered another body, a woman wearing a wedding band. This one was thoroughly decomposed, so it was apparent that she had passed some time before American Falls was drained. Both her identity and cause of death were never revealed. Given the frequency of suicides at Niagara Falls, it's almost a miracle that there weren't more bodies found. While the vast majority of deaths at Niagara Falls have been suicides, a small percentage of them have been from stunts and accidents. One adrenaline junkie who did end up surviving was Annie Edson Taylor, a 63-year-old school teacher who went over the falls in a barrel in 1901. While she did manage to come out practically unharmed, her first words after the stunt were reportedly, "No one ought ever do that again." In November of 1969, everything came to an end when the engineers set off dynamite to destroy the dam, and the water all came back in front of more than 600 eager spectators. It was clearly the end of a strange period of time. Things mostly went back to normal, although Luna Island, the small piece of land between Horseshoe Falls and Bridal Veil Falls, remained closed for years due to fears that the land was unstable. At some point in the future, engineers will need to assess whether they want to continue intervening to slow the erosion of the falls or whether they'll leave their fate to nature. Of course, the falls will still erode a little even with human intervention. Luckily, however, we humans have another 15,000 years or so to revel in their beauty before they're completely overtaken by Mother Nature. Believe it or not, in 2016, the State Park Commission announced plans to drain Niagara Falls yet again in the not-so-distant future in order to replace 2 pedestrian bridges. meaning that another huge dam would need to be constructed just like in 1969. This time, however, the Commission failed to secure the necessary $30 million in funding, so the project has been postponed for now, but officials have remained optimistic that the project will eventually be carried out because unlike in 1969, social media makes it easier to raise awareness and to hype people up over the possibility of seeing something as strange as a completely dry Niagara Falls. But if the falls do get drained once again, those who choose to see it must be prepared for the potential to see the aftermath of the poor souls who chose to take their lives there.